Welcome back, everyone. You'll be watching this on April 1st. April Fool's Day is canceled, by the way, in case you were not aware. Jokes about being sick, jokes about being pregnant, all the jokes, none of the jokes, none of the jokes. They're not funny this year. We'll just stick with the classic jokes. We'll stick with the old jokes, okay? Uh, Let me throw you back to the very first day of class. We had just come back from Christmas break. And in order to just kind of get the ball rolling without getting into any material the first day, which is typical, I made a big deal of saying that Christmas was great to me because I got some of my favorite things that I've ever owned in my life, which was a set of about three different, just beautiful nightgowns, night shirts. I mean, whatever, gender neutral, fine nightgowns that I got for Christmas. And I made a quip at some point during the first day that I'd be wearing them to class. Well, who knew it was going to be so easy? So, just to let you know, the red flannel version of the beautiful nightgowns I got for Christmas. Is it lovely? Yes, it is. You should all feast your eyes and be jealous because it is warm and comforting and soft. And I don't have to wear anything else because I'm working from home. I'm washed, I'm showered. Look, the hair is still there. Everything's fine. Just in a ponytail. All right, you want to get going? Let's get going. You have class. You're paying for this. Um, Today we're moving on with disorders. And today is going to be just about disorder after disorder after disorder after disorder. So keep yourself buckled in. Make sure that you don't constantly think, oh my God, I have that. Oh my God, I have that. Oh my God, I have that. And just get ready to hear about a few. Last lecture went a little bit long, so this one might be a little bit on the shorter side. Okay. First thing, somatic symptom disorders. What does that mean? That is an invasion of psychological phenomena, information processing events onto something that is typically observed by a medical doctor while examining the body. Okay, so it is mental disorders focused on the physical body. These include things like hypochondriasis. We used to call it hypochondriasis. We used to call people who had disorder hypochondriacs. But as you'll notice with a lot of these disorders, we have tried to get away from the old terms because they really had been bogged down with a pretty serious negative stigma. Um, Calling somebody a hypochondriac is a statement about their identity. That's who they are, not a disorder that they have. It's not good to call someone a schizophrenic. It's not someone good to call someone by their diagnosis. And so somebody who we used to call a hypochondriac now would be properly referred to as a person with illness anxiety disorder. That is the language adopted by the therapeutic community decades ago, which was originally known as person first, but which is now pretty much standard and everybody's used to it. But it is person with illness anxiety disorder. What this means is that you are deeply concerned, maybe convinced, but maybe just concerned that the little things that happen to you every day, the little aches, the little pains, the fevers, the things that go along with being a human being are caused by an underlying serious illness. And you are very worried about what that underlying serious illness might be that are giving rise to these relatively everyday symptoms. Okay, so that is the illness anxiety, that you have an unknown illness and it is causing you dread. And so you will often seek to find out what that underlying illness is by consulting with medical professionals and by trying to get somebody to confirm for you that there's something seriously wrong and that that is an explanation for your symptoms. That is a bit different from somatization disorder. Somatization disorder is also concerned with the idea that you need medical treatment for something that is not really appropriate for medical treatment, but is more appropriate for treatment of information processing, even if that does include some pharmacology, some medication. But the somatization disorder is a preoccupation with the symptoms themselves. Okay, you are really, really worried that your nose is too big on one side as opposed to the other side. It really, really, really bothers you that your fingernails don't seem to be the right color. It's the symptoms themselves that got your attention, and it causes you, as we always state, either a clinically significant amount of distress or dysfunction in your life. There's ways that you can't feel that you want to feel. There's things you can't do that you want to do because you are so preoccupied with those symptoms. Your book mentions this thing called cyberchondria, kind of a new made up word. I think it was kind of half tongue in cheek and in jest. But it's the idea that now, with a wealth of information at our fingertips and no wall of expertise between us and the data, humanity is spending a lot of time diving in to the diagnostic criteria for a lot of things, looking things up on WebMD, and getting convinced that a lot of really serious things are wrong with them because they were able to find their symptoms on a laundry list without having a background to know what differential diagnosis and probability really means for how they're feeling. So there we go. That's cyberchondria. All right. Another somatic symptom disorder is this thing called conversion disorder. It used to be known as hysteria. We would call people hysterics, and lo and behold, surprise, surprise, usually it was women who were hysteric. This was, in fact, a very strong specialty of Sigmund Freud himself. He saw a lot of women clients who he diagnosed with hysteria. What it really is a psychological problem that is causing a physical symptom. The physical symptoms are not explained by any mechanism outside of the central nervous system that could be causing them. So if you're worried about the color of your fingernails, well, sure, you might have a certain, just a genetic predisposition, or perhaps a vitamin deficiency that might cause your nails to be a little wavy or discolored. But in the conversion disorder, there's no actual thing to look at on the body outside of your central nervous system at all. There are no wavy fingernails. There are no or actual symptoms. There are reports of symptoms, but that don't have a, I loosely use the word medical explanation. And one of the most famous examples of this is called glove anesthesia. It was a situation where patients would report that they could not feel or could not move their hands from the wrist up. And people might say, well, you know, you might have nerve damage. You might have a nerve ending. You might have some sort of pinched signal somewhere in there. Let's take a look at that. Let's treat that. But the reason glove anesthesia is such a good example of a conversion disorder is this. There is no arrangement of damaged or pinched or otherwise interfered with nerves, blood vessels, bones, or anything like that that would cut off feeling and function at the wrist. The way it actually works is that if you have a nerve or a pinched nerve or a damage, there are different nerves serving the different parts of your forearm and hand, so that if any one of them is damaged, you might get numb or immobile throughout this area, but these fingers would still work. Or you might get numb and immobile this area, but these fingers would still work. There's nothing except for the simultaneous malfunction of like a bunch of different nerves that would cut everything off right here. So besides the lack of a medical explanation, the lack of a physical, neurological, or bone explanation that was actually located in the hand or in the wrist, Freud then went looking for underlying trauma, problems in childhood, and after discussing that for a certain amount of time, those symptoms that were reported in hysteria had a tendency to resolve or go away. One thing that I want to make absolutely sure is not being confused with this is the idea of faking it. These patients were not faking that they couldn't feel their hands. They weren't faking that they couldn't move their hands. They really couldn't feel them. They really couldn't move them. But the cause was just psychological as opposed to, as I said, anything structural. There is a word, though, for someone who does not have a disorder, but is trying to convince you or does convince you that they have the disorder and knows that they are lying, and that thing is called malingering. The malingering patient is someone who fakes their symptoms. I was given a really interesting bit of advice when I was in counseling, and it was, you want to be able to say the word malingering, you want to be able to know what it means, but you never want to be able to spell the word malingering. And basically the point was this: you never want to put in your notes that you've come to the conclusion that somebody is not being honest about their symptoms, because that just puts you in a really, really bad position later on if it turns out that you're wrong. It's interesting enough as a therapist to discuss the possibility, but you never really want to go on a record saying that you were so smart that you knew that somebody's symptoms were fake. Yeah, it was a pretty good bit of advice. Thank you, Pet Sherry. Um, Another set of disorders, a little bit more controversial, are the dissociative disorders. The inability for you to recall your previous thoughts or recall your memories is something that will cause what we call a dissociation. Why do we have memory and dissociation linked so much here? And the reason is that it's really hard to get a handle on what it is that we talk about when we say self. It's hard to know what a self actually is, but the best guess that we have, the best explanation that we have, is that self is a persistence in awareness over time. And the only way that we can be aware of ourselves at other periods in time is to access memories. So the idea of self and the idea of memory are really tightly bound and intertwined. If you have a relative who has Alzheimer's disease or dementia of any other kind, when they begin to lose their ability to remember what they've done, if they begin to lose their ability to remember things that they've done, they are in the process of losing themselves for who they are. If you woke up tomorrow and you did not have any memory, it would be very difficult for somebody to really make the case that you were still yourself. Persistence in memory is what makes a self. And so dissociative disorders are, for a large part, have to do with memory. Now, the other thing about dissociative disorders is that they cannot be physical in nature. I hate this distinction between physical and psychological because, of course, the psychological is physical. But if you get a traumatic brain injury, if you get in a motorcycle accident or something falls in your head, then you're not going to get diagnosed with a dissociative disorder. You'll definitely have problems and they'll fix them and they'll work with them, but you won't get a DSM diagnostic criteria. You'll get whatever criteria a diagnosis comes along with blunt force trauma to the head. So here's a couple of different dissociative disorders that we can actually discuss. The first is dissociative amnesia, where you cannot remember yourself, you cannot remember who you are, or you cannot remember a particular event, or you cannot remember back in time past a particular event. And the very, very good, very, very famous movie Memento was a version of this, except that it was not retrograde amnesia. Retrograde meaning you can't remember past a certain event, but it was anterograde amnesia, which is that up to a certain point in this person's life, they stopped being able to remember things from that point on. And so having a protagonist with that kind of memory, where they could only remember things for a short amount of time unless they wrote them down, makes for a very interesting tool to play with when it comes to the plot. And they did. There's another very, very famous patient with anterograde amnesia. Is known as 10-second Tom. And after this slide, we'll go ahead and show you a clip on that as well. Another thing is dissociative fugue. This is dissociative amnesia, where you forget basically all of your memories and information about self, all of your identifying information. But for some reason, it seems to oftentimes come along with a physical distancing from where you were when you last remembered your autobiographical information. So you find yourself in a new town with a new job, a new family, a new identity, because you simultaneously dumped all of your identifying information and left wherever it is that you were. And it makes you pretty hard to find when you don't know who you are and you can't start leaving information traces. So those are the different kinds of fugue and dissociative amnesia. Now, 10-second Tom.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you our most distinguished clinical subject, Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom.
Henry.
Marlon. Doug.
Lucy.
Hi.
Oh, those are cool flip-flops. Where'd you get them?
You like those? It's an interesting story. I was over on the North Shore the other day.
Hi, I'm Tom.
Huh? Henry. Hi.
Marlon. Tom lost part of his brain in a hunting accident. His memory only lasts 10 seconds.
I was in an accident? That's terrible.
Don't worry, you'll totally get over it in about 3 seconds.
Get over it? I mean, what happened? Did I get shot in the brain? Hi, I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Lucy.
Hi. Doug.
Hey.
Marlon.
Hey, Tom, can I tell you a secret?
Just kidding, of course. 10 Second Tom is obviously a character from 50 First Dates, back when Adam Sandler was a little bit less weird. Anyway, but 10 Second Tom is a fictional character who was based on a couple of cases, one of the most famous of which is HM. HM is coming up in the actual informative clip about anterograde amnesia.
61 years ago, 27-year-old Henry Gustav Molaison had a portion of his brain surgically removed in hopes that it would mitigate his epileptic seizures. His seizures vanished, but so did his ability to retain memories. Because of this, he spent the next 55 years as HM, the anonymous case study for worldwide research on memory and amnesia. Scientists discovered his excised brain part, the hippocampus, was responsible for declarative memory, that which is consciously learned and later retrieved. The post-surgical HM recalled general aspects of his life and could learn new skills, but was incapable of remembering anything he just experienced. After his death, HM's brain was preserved for future investigation, even though the missing hippocampus and the insight it could have offered was long gone. That is, until researchers recently used magnetic resonance imaging to discover vestiges of the removed segment. Along with a vast trove of knowledge about the complexity of memory learned from HM while alive, this new discovery will help add even more dimension to the study of memory and possibly brain-related conditions like Mr. Molaison's epilepsy.
Welcome back. Another very famous, more famous than common disorder is dissociative identity disorder. It is now in the literature known as DID, but it has had many names over the past. It has been multiple personality disorder. That was the proper name for a while, and that's fine. It's not proper anymore, but it was better than the old name, which was split personality. And it's better than the name that it was confused with before that, which was schizophrenia. Now, I need to tell you, schizophrenia was never multiple personality, split personality, or dissociative identity. They have always been two very different things. This was one of the pet peeves of one of my professors when I was an undergraduate, Dr. David Santagrossi, who would make a huge point of making this distinction clear every time he taught a class. If you have schizophrenia, you will have, and we'll get into this, you will have the impression that there are other people who are speaking to you in your head, but that is not the same as being a different person at a different time. Okay, nevertheless, here's what dissociative identity is in terms of its description. It is a bunch of stable traits, but that are stable at a person, for a person at a different time. We talked about personality in the last chapter. It is traits that differentiate you from another person, but that stay stable for you over time. Well, dissociative identity means that those traits are stable for you, but sometimes you, like on Wednesdays, you are Bill, and on Thursdays, you are Pete. And Bill and Pete have different stable traits. But whenever you are Bill, you have all the stable traits of Bill, and whenever you are Pete, you have all the stable traits of Pete. The other thing with dissociative identities is that it's supposed to be the case that people do not have memories of what they were doing when they were the other personality, when they were the other identity. So if you were Bill on Wednesday and you're Pete on Thursday, Pete does not remember what Bill did on Wednesday. All right. Now, why do we have this? Well, people have proposed that it is the result of trying to compartmentalize some really traumatic event that happened to you when you were a child, that you say, no, that didn't happen to me, that happened to somebody else, that happened to somebody else, and you eventually just make that somebody else into another self that you sometimes occupy and sometimes don't. There's good reason not to buy that explanation 100%. And it's good to entertain it. It's good to know that it's out there in the literature and in the minds of people who study psychology. But it's interesting to note that a lot of the patterns of people who are diagnosed with dissociative identity do not follow any pattern of childhood trauma or pattern of life experience or genetic pattern or any of the other things that we would expect when we talk about how a diagnosis works. A lot of the times it turns out that the people with dissociative identity disorder all seem to be seeing the same therapist. And it's not a dissociative identity specialist and they came to the therapist because they had dissociative identity disorder. It's oftentimes the case that people go to a therapist and they end up discovering that they have dissociative identity. So it's very possibly the case that at least in a lot of instances, the suggestion that you might have dissociative identity disorder is part of the reason why you end up getting diagnosed with it. That's what we call iatrogenic. Iatrogenic is a word that means originating with the physician. So if your physician comes and gives surgery to you with dirty hands and you get a staph infection, that's an iatrogenic infection. Dissociative identity might be an iatrogenic psychological disorder. If you want to see a really good example of a dissociative identity, it's a really entertaining one. It's a really good one. It is, as I said before, probably one of my favorite movies, but Fight Club was a pretty good example of dissociative identity, except for the fact that the two personalities had a tendency to interact with each other at the same time in real time. That's not exactly how dissociative identity is supposed to work. But if you want to see Edward Norton, who seems to really follow these dissociative identity movies as an actor, you can go back to Primal Fear. And that was another dissociative identity portrayal from Ed Norton. Right there, see? And you can see him, he looks like he's about 6 years old. Isn't he so adorable? He's so cute. Okay. Sybil was the original dissociative identity, multiple personality media portrayal, which resulted in an explosion of people who were diagnosed with dissociative identity after it came out. Okay, an old movie, very popular, very well watched, very heavily and highly and widely discussed, about a person who had like 15, 16, 30, 40 different personalities. And it led to a lot of drama and activity in her life. It was supposedly based on the true story of a person. That person later on in life had a little bit more to say about the veracity of that account, saying, well, it was really kind of for the publisher and not really about what was true for me. It was about what was going to sell. And so, it's neither here nor there, but it kind of backs up the idea that if cultural phenomena can push a disorder around so much, it might have more to do with the culture than with the person with the disorder. Okay. So here's your comedy break. Look, I just went for a modern classic right here, okay? It's a pretty heavy set of topics we're covering today. It's a pretty heavy discussion. So I think what you need is Jim Gaffigan's Hot Pockets. You've probably seen it before. If you haven't, come on, become a part of our culture. If you have, you might enjoy watching it again.
I'm moving a little slow tonight. I had a Hot Pocket for dinner. Good to see I'm not the only white trash here. I buy the Hot Pockets. I go in grocery stores. I'm like, I get these. I've never eaten a Hot Pocket and then afterwards been, I'm glad I ate that. I'm always like, I'm gonna die. I paid for that? Did I eat it or rub it on my face? My back hurts. Ow. I was looking at a box of Hot Pockets. They have a warning printed on the side. It said, warning, you just bought Hot Pockets. Hope you're drunk or heading home to a trailer. You hillbilly, enjoy the next NASCAR event. Hot Pockets. I like NASCAR. He's a jerk. Never really see that on a menu when you go out to dinner. Let's see, I'll have the Caesar salad and the Hot Pocket. Tonight's specials, we have a sea bass, which is broiled, and we have a Hot Pocket, which is cooked in a dirty microwave. And that comes with a side of Pepto. Is your Hot Pocket cold in the middle? It's frozen. But it can be served boiling lava hot. Will it burn my mouth? It'll destroy your mouth. Everything will taste like rubber for a month. All of the Hot Pocket. Hot Pocket! Hot Pockets, yeah. They haven't been around that long, like 10 years. How'd they come up with that? Was there some kind of marketing meeting like, I got an idea. How about we fill a Pop-Tart with nasty meat? And you can cook it in a sleeve thing. You can dunk it in the toilet. It's weird. There is the vegetarian Hot Pocket for those of us that don't want to eat meat but still would like diarrhea. Hot Pocket. It should just come with a roll of toilet paper. Diarrhea Pocket. You ever notice there's no dignified way to buy toilet paper? You always had to buy in that multi-pack of like 18 rolls. Stick it in your cart. Everyone in the store's like, does that guy ever leave the bathroom? What's he living off of Hot Pockets? Hot Pocket. There's the lean pocket. I don't even want to know what's in there. Imagine the directions. Take out of box, place directly in toilet. Flush pocket. Pocket. Recently, they introduced the breakfast Hot Pocket. Finally. I can't think of a better way to start the day. Good morning. You're about to call in sick. Hot Pocket. Now you can have a Hot Pocket for breakfast, a Hot Pocket for lunch, and be dead by dinner. Dead Pocket. Do love that jingle. Yeah. You think they worked hard on that song? What do you got so far, Bill? Hot Pocket. That's good. That's very good. Not as good as your By Menon, but it's good. Now, what are we going to run in Mexico? Caliente Pocket. You've got a gift, my friend. Don't hide that in a bushel basket. Hot Pocket. I saw a commercial for a chicken pot pie Hot Pocket. Now they're just messing with us. Just a matter of time. Have you tried the Hot Pocket? Hot Pocket? It's a Hot Pocket filled with a Hot Pocket. Tastes just like a Hot Pocket. I'm gonna go and stick my head in the microwave. Hot Pocket!
All right. I'm glad we got that out of the way so that we can have a little bit of buffer between us and sadness when it comes to discussing mood disorders. Mood disorders are going to involve depression and bipolar disorders. That's all we're going to do for those disorders for this class. But mood disorders are nothing that you can establish over the course of a day. There's nothing that can happen to you on one day that can cause you to be diagnosed with a mood disorder. These disorders have to be prolonged and they have to be disabling. They have to be going on for so long that you cannot function because of your emotional state. A temporary reaction to a disturbing life event does not meet you the diagnostic criteria of a mood disorder. If you are feeling terrible and not able to get up or go to class for a while after a breakup, we're not talking about a mood disorder. We're talking about a tough time. All right. So here are the criteria that go into depressive disorders. The depressive disorders that we're going to talk about are major depressive disorder and persistent depressive disorder. A major depressive disorder episode is something that's going to last at least 2 weeks. And it is going to involve what is known as anhedonia, which is not being able to enjoy a thing, not being able to feel happy. Anhedonia. Hedonism, if you've ever heard of that, the root word is the pursuit of pleasure and happiness. Anhedonia then is the lack or the absence of hedonism. It's the inability to enjoy things. Another thing that might come along is a loss of interest. Things that you like to enjoy no longer feel good. It's not motivating to get up and do anything. Your favorite things just aren't worth getting off the couch for. One of those two things has to be true in the span of 2 weeks in order to meet these criteria, in addition to some other criteria that I'm actually going to share with you right now. I didn't put them down on the slide, but I want you to hear them so that you know what kind of experience a person might be having before they can meet the definition for a major depressive episode. All right, and here they are. Significant weight change or appetite disturbance. That's one of the criteria that you may have to meet for the definition of major depressive episode. Sleep disturbance, either insomnia or hypersomnia. A lot of these things have to do with going one way or the other. Either way is a symptom of depression. Psychomotor agitation or retardation. That means that you're moving really quickly all the time and just or you're moving really slow. Fatigue or loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness, the diminished ability to think or concentrate, increased indecisiveness, you can't make a decision, and another possibility is recurrent thoughts of death, recurrent suicidal ideation without a specific plan, or a suicide attempt or specific plan for suiciding. So all of these are possible criteria. One of the first two has to be true in order to get the diagnosis, that is depressed mood or diminished interest, and then 5 of the 9 have to be included in order for you to have a major depressive episode. That means that 4 of those things cannot be true of you. No suicidal ideation. You don't seem to be psychomotor agitated. You might not feel worthless and you are still concentrating, but you can have the other ones be true and you still can have a major depressive episode if it goes on for 2 weeks or more. Persistent depressive disorder is what we used to call dysthymia, and it involves milder depression symptoms, but they've gone on for 2 or more years. This is pretty rough as well, because you might be able to sustain a low mood for a little bit of a while and you say it's just going to end, but if you've been feeling that way for a couple of years, it really wears on a person and begins to give them the impression that things are never going to get better. So here are some of the criteria for persistent depressive disorder. You've had a depressed mood for most of the day on more days than not, as indicated either by subjective account or observation of others for at least 2 years. So on more days than not, you or somebody else would have had to say, man, that person's having a low mood. While you're depressed, you will have to have experienced 2 of these symptoms: poor appetite or overeating, insomnia or hypersomnia, low energy or fatigue, low self-esteem, poor concentration, or feelings of hopelessness. All right. So it's basically a lot like major depressive disorder, except that it has been going on for 2 years. If you feel better and you're doing okay for any 2-month period in that time, persistent depressive disorder doesn't apply to you. What the point that I kind of want to make is that these criteria are, when properly applied, fairly strict. And so while I won't stop you in the hall and give you the riot act right there, if somebody says, I'm depressed today, it's technically not true. Depression isn't something that happens today. It's something that kind of defines how you're feeling for an extended period of time. All right, the next thing to talk about is bipolar disorder. This is basically depression with a twist. We used to call it manic depression. We now call it a bipolar disorder. But it involves those criteria that you would meet to say that you are depressed, but also is in the mix mania. Manic episodes are the ones where somebody looks like, they look like a TV portrayal of somebody who's on methamphetamine, to be honest with you. They have high energy. They are sometimes irrational. They are super optimistic. They are going to solve everything. They're going to invent something. They're going to write a masterpiece. They're constantly active. They don't sleep. And they are so convinced that everything is going their way that they aren't at all careful with what they do or what they have. And so people in manic episodes will have a tendency to go and invest or gamble all their money away, and at the end of the manic episode not have anything left, which will really just make the depressive episode that's coming later even worse. sometimes people don't really want treatment for bipolar disorder because they hate the idea of getting rid of their manias. They love their manias. They love their highs. It feels really good. But it inevitably comes along with a crash. It inevitably comes along with a cost, and that's the depression. So, um, bipolar 1 is a situation where your highs are very high, you peak really big with the mania, but then when that's done, your lows are really low. You get a really big hit of depression. But there comes another patterns as well. Bipolar 2, you don't get quite as much mania out of your mania, but you still get all of the depression. So this is like a major depressive episode with a couple of episodes or times of hypomania, where you feel pretty good, but you're not quite as out of control as somebody who would have a major mania episode like in bipolar 1. And then there's cyclothymia, where there are highs, there are lows, but neither one of them is so extreme as to cause the kind of problems in bipolar 1. So the difference between bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and cyclothymia are more than anything just matters of degree. Okay, a couple of thoughts that I want to give you on mood disorders. The book goes into a little bit about where they come from. The book goes a little bit into like what it means to have one. I want to throw you a couple of things that you might not have heard of, which I guess is value added for your education. There's this concept out there called depressive realism. And people with depression oftentimes jokingly like to brag about this. But it's an interesting take. And the idea is that when a person is functioning in a depressed mood, or has at least a history of major depression, there are some subjective there's some subjective estimations about their social world or the world that they are typically closer to the truth on than people who are not or who have not suffered depression. So if you are depressed and somebody gives you an estimate of how much you can control a task, the person with depression is going to have a better ability to judge how much control they had over that task, especially when the control is low. They're not going to optimistically overestimate the amount of control that they had. They will have a tendency to remember accurately feedback about their performance, especially negative feedback. And they're more likely to be honest and truthful with themselves and correctly predict what other people would say about their interpersonal styles. They're willing to deal with, report the negative. And so this has come to the idea that maybe people with depression are in fact just being more honest in a terrible world or a cynical world. And that perhaps depression is not an unrealistically negative outlook on the world, but just a different one, because most of the people out there who are functioning outside of depressive symptoms are in fact not right, but they're being unrealistically positive. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind when it comes to the idea of depressive realism. This only functions in a couple of very narrow measurements: contingency, feedback about performance, and interpersonal style. When it comes to your ability to be productive or work or have good relationships, depression does not give you an advantage. And so it's not very useful, even if there are some tasks on which you can get greater accuracy because you're not being blinded by optimism. And then lastly, your book has talked a little bit about what it is that causes depressive and bipolar disorders. And they have a lot of details in there, and it goes around and around, and it covers several pages. And you will need to get into the details because I'm free to put any of those questions on the exam. But the point that I want to make here is that if you are arguing with someone about whether depression is the result of genes, or whether depression is the result of brain chemicals, or whether depression is the result of thought processes, or whether depression is the result of something that has happened to you, you shouldn't be having an argument. What you are all seeing, if from taking those different points of view, is seeing the same problem from different perspectives. Every one of those things goes into what happens when a person experiences depressive symptoms. And so I made this little chart here. Events are the only things that lie outside of your biological form. Your genes are the things that have set up your biology to react to all the things that are going to happen, the outside events, but your genes also determine how you react to chemicals that are inside your body. Your genes are responsible for setting up the thought infrastructure that supports your cognition. Your genes are responsible for setting up the behavioral feedback mechanisms that determine your behavior. So genes kind of lay the groundwork for how all these things are going to interact, but then they kind of just go away because they cannot be changed over time. All the other changes happen over the course of a lifetime. But the connection between events and thoughts are one place where you could get in there and change what's going to happen in terms of a mood disorder. Okay, a good way to do that is to engage in cognitive therapy. Cognitive therapy will allow you new tools so that you can think differently about the events that are happening to you, so that the chemical and behavioral and emotional reactions that you have later on based on those thoughts are different. They are how you want them to be more like. So if you want to break the depressive connection between events and thoughts, cognitive therapy can give you a hand. Thoughts then have an expression in your body of chemical effects. If you are startled, your kidneys will release norepinephrine. You will get jumpy. That's an information piece that came into your brain. It was processed through your central nervous system, and then it told your kidneys, or it told the other endocrine glands in your system to release certain chemicals based on how you have interpreted your environment. And so if your brain is low on serotonin, then there are things that you can do about that. But a part of it originated with how you're processing information. So if you want to break the connection between how you're thinking about things and what kind of chemicals or what level of chemicals you're producing in your body, medication is a way to get in there and change the effects between thoughts and chemicals. Medications are also a way to get in between chemicals and behavior. But behavior and events is a two-way street, and behavior therapy is a good way to get in there. So if you want to behave in such a way that it changes your environment, and your environment feeds back into what you're going to find rewarding and punishing so that it changes your behavior, behavior therapy is going to be addressing the contingencies between those two parts of the puzzle. So it isn't really the case that psychological disorders of any kind rest in just one place. They are things that can be expressed in a whole bunch of different ways, can be tracked in a whole bunch of different ways, and can be interrupted or disrupted or helped through a whole bunch of different interventions, depending on where in the loop you think you might have the most leverage. All right, so that's what I have for today. I hope it's going well for you. I hope that you're catching the lectures in time. I hope that everybody is staying safe. I hope that we'll be ready for our exam. But catch me back again here on Friday. And until then, have a great day.